saves precious time and money. With all the information she needs on the back of the envelope, she checks her supply of notions and fabrics before going to the store.
Sewing is a pleasure, even on my timetable. Thanks
Mustn't
to the
forget the freeze frame.
portfolio.
Now the Vogue portfolio can be yours for an annual rate of just $14.95. You receive 10 mailings, each containing 25 to 50 envelopes, for a total of over 400 new designs a year. And if you subscribe now, you receive any Vogue pattern of your choice for half the suggested retail price. Call 685-2055. That's 685-2055. Or write to Vogue Patterns, Box 111, 444 Robson Street, Vancouver, V6B2B5. Just $14.95. Visa, MasterCard, personal check, or money order. No CODs.
Good morning. This is day 4 of the Webster series, attempting to assess and interpret the massive social revolutionary package and economic control about, it would seem, to be imposed by the government in Victoria. We've tackled many other aspects. Today we're going to concentrate on education, which, as you know, is under a fiscal and executive attack unprecedented in the history of British Columbia. One of the assets that the government has in its attack is that the public image of education, of teachers and universities, has not been all that good in recent years. But today we want to get to the guts of the matter, where the teachers are involved, the jobs are involved, the BC School Trustees, who I suspect are horrified by the centralization of their previous powers, and the universities, where freedom of speech might be. Here's a guy who's always looked down his nose at tenure, and now he's beginning to ask the questions, could freedom of speech be affected by the apparent intentions in Bill 3 to wipe out job security, not just for the janitor, but for the guys in the ivory towers? And we're going to start with universities this morning, and with Dr. George Pedersen, the almost brand new president of the University of British Columbia, a man who has made his mark in British Columbia already. And Dr. William Saywell, who arrived on the campus only on Tuesday of this week to take over his new job at a very tough time. He comes from Toronto. And also on the program, Joy Leach, the president of the BC School Trustees Association, to interpret for us how the harried trustees now stand. And, of course, present always in education programs, Larry Kuehn, the president of the BC Teachers Federation. And we're also going to have a look at the $10 million commission, which has been sitting in Vancouver, headed by Thumper MacDonald, Donald MacDonald, and finishes its hearings in Vancouver today. But that's for later in the program. First, to give a test to 2 university presidents, we go to the university problems with Drs. Pedersen and Saywell after the break. I don't think anyone in our community argues the need for a restraint. The restraint on education seems to be as tough as in any other area on which the government is going to, I presume, impose its will. So first of all, to my 2 university presidents, what an opportunity, Dr. Pedersen and Dr. Saywell. Give me first, if you can, succinctly, any deleterious effects on your programs, your campus, and your educational plans because of budgetary cutbacks at UBC.
Well, obviously, Jack, we're faced with a situation where we received about 99% of last year's operating budget. It does mean that in terms of dollar cutback, we are faced with a reduction of the order of $3.1 million, which we have to find in the remaining 7 months of this fiscal year. That's exclusive of any salary increases for employees of the universities during this year, 83-84.
Does this mean that that your numbers of students or the student aid or the opportunity to go to university is going to be more severely restricted than before?
It won't this current year, because we have in stream registration procedures that will probably result in one of the largest increases in enrollment we've had in many years at the University of British Columbia. Permission to pre-register was up of the order of 8.4%. Registration in first-year arts and first-year science, the 2 major faculties that we have, was up close to 25%. So we're trying to do, with less dollars, the provision of greater services. And obviously there will be cases where students simply will not get registered in the courses that they want.
You don't seem to be terribly upset about it. Are you merely being calm and logical, or do you foresee a situation down the road with the extensive freeze and the permanent wage controls now applied, which apply to your people?
Yeah.
Do you foresee us going back to the good old days of education of the cream of the crop?
Well, I guess universities by definition are always the cream of the crop in one way or another, depending on what particular level they're admitted into the universities. But I don't think there's any question that we will have to face cutback in terms of the number of students that work in service.
Is it a grievous situation, or are you just going to cope anyway regardless?
Well, you suggested I wasn't particularly excited about it. That's clearly not the case, Jack, but I guess the problem is of a magnitude at the moment that I'm not sure that, that I can get as excited as if it were even a bit smaller. It's a very large problem that we're facing at the moment.
Dr. Saywell, you arrived here on Tuesday, you suddenly find that in your period before you came, you've already had to cut a number of teaching hours at SFU.
Oh, we've made serious cutbacks already, and there are more to come. I think in the past 18 months we've lost about $4 million out of our budget. These were reductions that took place earlier. We're going to cut back another $3 million in a budget, of course, that's smaller than the UBC budget this year. I think the biggest immediate effect will be, I think as George implied, in the quality of education in the classroom. The students are in place, they're on campus, but we can't provide them with the quality of education before because we don't have the same student-staff ratios. We obviously can't afford to keep up the same kind of lab supplies and the laboratory sciences. It's very difficult. In the longer haul, it's going to be a much more grievous situation.
Well, of course, you knew all these things were happening. You knew that Bill 3 was coming in before you came to accept your new position, did you not?
I did not know Bill 3 was going to come in when I accepted the position. I knew Bill 3 was coming in before I actually got here. And a lot of people in Toronto said, you're crazy to go out there. And I said, we'll make it through, and I'm going to a great institution in a great province, and don't worry about it.
Now, let's go to Bill 3. As we all will agree, job security, to wit, tenure, has been directly attacked in Bill 3. And the government, almost directly, has the power to fire at will any or all professors. Is that correct?
If the bill were accepted and put into force the way it was initially written, that would be the case. At least that is my interpretation of it.
Is that acceptable to you in any way, shape, or form?
Absolutely not, and it has nothing to do with the question of job security, and I realize that that's where we get into the bind in terms of arguments about the question of tenure. The issue for me, Jack, focuses around the question of academic freedom, and how does one ensure that those who work in universities and who have a unique charge of providing new insights, new knowledge, new understandings, are free from any sort of external potential interference or views that will force them to temper whatever research that they do.
It's very difficult for the public to accept that argument in 1983, gentlemen, because people, rightly or wrongly, tend to look on a tenured professor as a man who has a lifetime job forever, regardless of whether or not he maintains his original standards. Is that the public view?
I would guess that's true.
Is there not a lot of truth in the fact that tenure becomes security and dilutes the quality of teaching in the long run?
I don't think it dilutes the quality of teaching in the long run with the vast majority of people in universities. It is true that the public image is like that. There are all kinds of other sectors in the public area and perhaps in the private where implied tenure is given. And in fact, in the university, it's a great deal more difficult to get it in terms of pure judgment than anywhere else. Jack, I think the public who have lived in societies which are not free, as I have lived in and worked in and traveled in, would have a far deeper appreciation of the value of academic freedom, to reinterpret ideas, to criticize, to probe new ideas. It's the, if you will, the crazy professor pursuing the crazy idea that makes the breakthrough in something. We've got to protect that in a free society. I believe in tenure passionately.
But Dr. Pedersen, this government brought in this Bill 3 legislation, obviously sure in the knowledge that somebody had to take the power to take away tenure to make you people more efficient and more cost-effective. Is that not correct?
Yeah, but if the issue is restraint, which is purportedly what Bill 3 was written all about. It has nothing to do with the issue of tenure per se. If you're concerned that there are inefficient professors, there are people who are not doing their jobs, let's deal with that as a separate issue. And I would acknowledge that in some cases universities have not done their job there. But to take away the provision of tenure in a single provincial constituency, when all the rest of the Western developed world utilizes that, is to ensure that we will have universities that are mediocre in this province. We will not retain the good people that we've got. It may be a psychological thing, you could argue. I don't know what it is, but I'm telling you that our very best people, indeed the minister received a letter signed by every one, I believe, of our Royal Society members, indicating that from their perspective, tenure was an important ingredient. Equally important to the question of retention is the capacity of the university to attract the people we want.
You can't attract anymore, can you?
No, not without that provision.
Well,
If everybody went out of the business of providing tenure, then I guess we're on the same ground rules as everyone else.
But my good friend Dr. McGeer says, oh, piffle, piffle, piffle. All good university profs will always have jobs.
Yes, that's true, but I noticed that he was quite quick to get his own tenured position extended.
He accepted tenure, as we well know.
Yes.
Is this a black mark? Is this a shameful mark on the face of education in British Columbia if Bill 3 goes through as is?
If Bill 3 went through as it was originally written, as I understand it, it would be, unquestionably, and it would have tragic consequences for the quality of higher education in this province. There's no doubt about that.
I must ask you something. I find it very difficult to get specifics because the government members want to sit in the woods and the bushes to see what public reaction is. Are you suggesting to me, gentlemen, either one of you, that there is an amendment prepared for Bill 3 affecting the specific tenure of university people?
My understanding is that the dismissal without cause is to be removed.
No. More with Drs. Pedersen and Saywell after the break. Jimmy Chabot, who's the provincial secretary, has said that tenure will not be withdrawn from university professors now holding it, but will not be granted in future contracts. With due respect, deference, and humility, that is not in Bill 3.
Right?
No such escape provision is in Bill 3.
That's right.
That's my understanding.
What do you suggest is the protection for tenured people at the moment?
Well, I don't think we have any at the present time if that bill is to go ahead. And as I said earlier, Jack, it will cause very, very severe problems for this provincial university system.
Let's leave the hiring for the moment. What they appear to have done just now is take all of you in the public sector,
Yes.
280,000 people paid out of Crown funds one way or another, and said, if you agree to cut your own throats and fire for budgetary reasons, we will exempt you from that provision of the Act. Do you not have such an agreement now where you can fire tenured professors without Bill 3?
Well, Simon Fraser has an exigency clause in its regulations. We don't have yet the procedures by which it's done, but at Simon Fraser, that I believe is the situation.
Yes. And it's true also at UBC. In the case of each of our employee groups, there is an understanding as to what will take place should we be faced with a severe fiscal exigency.
In other words, if you
The one area in which we do not have complete agreement has to do with the criteria and the procedures to be utilized with respect to faculty members. Now, but the basic principle that people can be let go for fiscal reasons is widely accepted. It's widely accepted.
In other
throughout the
words, if
university
you wiped out a department, there would be some kind of severance for the professors in that department, but they would go.
That's right.
If you had no money, you could let them go.
That's correct.
That's right.
If you have such an agreement, therefore, and if your faculty, if you accept this, you will become in the same category, and I'm not being, as the ordinary worker in government.
Sure.
And you've no objection to that.
Well, I mean, that's, one always objects to the fact you don't have sufficient resources, but if they're not there, you have to have some means of reducing payroll staff.
Without identifying any specific cases, I remember well a couple of incidents at one of our universities where it seemed to be impossible to fire a tenured professor.
Yes,
Would this kind of legislation not solve that problem?
it may well do, but unfortunately it solves a lot of other problems that I didn't want solved. That's the difficulty with it.
Under Bill 3, if it passes as is, who would use the guillotine on individual professors?
Well, presumably that is an administrative decision that would be worked out with the institution as a whole. I'm not sure that I can answer that in specific terms.
I mean, you see, because of your fears on freedom of speech, gentlemen, I'm always looking for a Machiavellian plot, and I'm thinking, aha, would the minister in charge of universities be able to say, I don't like that fellow who's so noisy and loud and Marxist-Leninist or whatever, fire him? Could he?
Well, I think that potential exists. I'm not suggesting for a moment it would occur, but I do think that, you know, the way that initial legislation came out, I think the potential for that to occur is there. Now, I know what the minister would be arguing if he were sitting in this chair. He would suggest to you that the legislation within the Universities Act makes provision whereby appointments to the university can only be done on the basis of the recommendation of the president to the board. However, there is nothing that says that the board couldn't utilize that act, get rid of a president it didn't like, put a president in they wanted in, and he in turn or she in turn could make the sorts of decisions they might want made. And this is fantasy that we're going through, you understand.
Not necessarily fantasy.
But I want to point out what I think the extreme possibilities are under that provision.
And you must add to that, surely, that the government appoints the Board of Governors.
Yes, it appoints the majority.
The
It
majority.
appoints 8 of the 50.
So they could do that. Now, a point raised about hiring. As the new president of the University of Simon Fraser, presuming you had money somewhere, could you go out today and hire the best man you wanted to come to British Columbia in the present climate?
It would, I think, in many areas be extremely difficult to do that. In those areas which are particularly hot in the academic community, such as computer science, electrical engineering, that kind of thing, it would be very difficult to get a high-quality person from a first-rate institution on this continent to come, given these uncertainties. I think we've been in a situation where we've had that face, where we've had people say to us, we won't go, and we have assured them that within the university, whatever the legislation is, within the university, we will use due process, we will use quality criteria, we will protect academic freedom, and so far we've been able to attract people. But it makes it very, very difficult.
May I give you one example?
Yes, please.
We had on our campus about 3 weeks ago a very outstanding young man. I happen to know him because he was a Shrum Medal winner at Simon Fraser University. Went from Simon Fraser University to a very outstanding Eastern University. Graduate in chemistry. His particular field is one that is in short supply in Canada at the present time. There are 8 positions open, and he has an opportunity to consider any one of those 8. He has made it very clear that under the present provisions, in spite of the fact he's a Vancouverite, would love to come back here, there is no way under the threat of that legislation that he will consider a job at the University of British Columbia.
Kind of tragic. Do you feel there is a threat that the universities in British Columbia might be subject to an international boycott or action at least by the CAUT?
Well, there's already been a great deal of concern expressed by a variety of teaching organizations. But it should be clear that it isn't just teaching organizations that are concerned, university teaching organizations that are concerned about this particular issue. I spent part of the summer, close to 2 weeks, at the conference of the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Holds a meeting every 5 years. This year it was in England. It was of great concern to a great many different countries that this legislation, which had just really hit the books at that point, was widely known and appeared to be of great concern to a great many different constituencies.
And yet, before the threat appeared, I've had university professors, I've had them here discussing the fact that tenure really isn't necessary nowadays and that a contract is more desirable for sometimes the professor and the university. Have you dropped all consideration of contracts?
I think tenure is still necessary as the basic scheme internationally to protect academic freedom, and I want to see it kept in place. I had a very useful meeting with the Premier yesterday, and basically what he was telling me was the difficulties of restraint in this province, which I accept. And I was telling him, just let us run our own shows, we will live within our means, we'll do it well, we'll protect quality, and we will, within that system, enshrine tenure, not as job security as it's generally understood and perhaps in the public. We have a selling job to do on that, exactly what tenure is, but we'll protect it in terms of academic freedom. Leave us alone, we'll do our job.
He's prepared to modify tenure to a point.
Well, I said earlier that there have been cases where perhaps we have not handled that as effectively as we might. And I think that if there is a problem in the area of tenured professors who are no longer productive, it is a responsibility of the university to take a look at that and deal with that as a separate issue. But don't do it under the rubric of restraint.
Mm-hmm. Therefore, you gentlemen will now be working very busily with your lawyers to produce a detailed tenure agreement which Commissioner Ed Peck can look at and say, yes, this meets the requirement of firing for budgetary. Let them pass through the umbrella. Is that correct? Are you now preparing new contracts on tenure for your faculty?
We're not doing that yet, Jack. That's probably one of the things that's going to be considered. To be very frank with you, we have sufficiently large problems dealing with about a $3+ million shortfall at the moment that we haven't had time to put
Gentlemen, I
together.
want you to sit still for one segment of telephone calls. I'm not quite sure which way they might or might not come at you. But seldom do we have the chance. Two university presidents. We just need Mr. Petch, and we've got everybody here.
That's right.
Dr. George Pedersen, whose name is spelled S-E-N, and Dr. Bill Saywell, the brand new president of Simon Fraser University. So call now, keep it crisp, keep it succinct, after the break. I must instruct my large staff to have Dr. McGeer here soon. And he's not going to talk about high tech. Go ahead to Messrs. Pedersen and Saywell.
Yes, Mr. Pedersen.
Yes.
Yes.
When I look at the problem that you would think we have here, I'm just wondering, the government are given $30 million more this year to cover costs in education. And I understand that you have the purse strings. What has happened to that?
I'm not clear on the question. I'm not sure how I have the purse string.
His question is that the government has given more dollars this year. Should that not be enough to keep you and people like you happy?
Well, I don't know where they're spending that money. All I can tell you is it's not going to the university community. The total amount that's available to the university community is down from last year.
Do you still have that kind of council thing which takes money and chops it up between the three universities?
Yes, there is a university's council that serves as the buffer body, and they had available to them almost the same amount of money.
But that council costs $1 million a year. We could cut that out, couldn't we?
I'm not going to comment on that one for obvious reasons.
Go ahead, please. Hello.
Hello.
That's you, sir.
Yes, to the president of UBC. If one had a scheme to establish a veterinary science center on the UBC campus, would they be interested? And how would one go about establishing that kind of faculty, since there's only one in Canada, that being in Saskatchewan?
There's only one in Western Canada. There are two English-speaking vet colleges in Canada. The other one is in Ontario at Guelph, and then there is a French-speaking college as well in the province of Quebec. If you were going to try and set up a new veterinary college, it would require the initiation on the part of one of the universities, and it would then require the approval of the university's council. But I must say I can't conceive of why one would think about adding new programs at a time when we're trying to keep the current ones afloat.
We sure whipped the public up into interest on the tenure problem, didn't we? Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Everybody's, this is to the two presidents. Everybody's in the restraints program. As a businessman, I am too. I've cut back enormously. One of the problems that irritate me more than anything, we have somewhere in the vicinity of about 3,500 to 4,000 foreign students coming into this country. They are getting subsidized fees to go to our universities. I have had the bun of that. That's taken money right out of my pocket to the tune of about $30 million a year. I want them to pay the full cost of education here. There's no more free rides.
Very good question. Well, you're well aware of the problem, especially at, I believe, at Simon Fraser University. Visaed students, correct?
I am well aware of sorry, go ahead.
And is it not correct that they receive a heavily subsidized education?
In the sense that they pay, as I understand it, in British Columbia exactly the same tuition that residents of the province do, yes, because education is subsidized. Tuition doesn't take up the full cost. In Ontario, they've raised the fees dramatically. In Great Britain, I think they took out the subsidization of visa students. And then, if George can correct me on this, then they had a commission of businessmen and so on look into that issue. And that commission came back and said, because of the importance of international trade and the image of this country vis-a-vis the foreign countries, let's again subsidize them.
All right, let's talk about British Columbia. Dr. Pedersen, you have extensive experience in this. Is it not dreadful at a time of restraint, when our university, we need the education for our unemployed and our mature students, that we are giving an edge to foreign visa students? Would you stop it?
No, I would not stop it, and I don't think we're giving an edge. It is certainly true that it becomes an issue of some consequence politically, and in the case of Simon Fraser University, as you're probably aware, there is now a ceiling on the percentage of students at the undergraduate level that can be international students. No, I happen to be a strong supporter of having international students. I realize that there are arguments that can be made both sides of the question of tuition, but I personally accept the point of view that says that it is one of the most important forms of foreign aid that this country can give. Indeed, if I had my way, we would remove some of the foreign aid programs we've got in other areas and move it into supporting international students.
But you would have a quota.
Yes, there has to be some
ceiling.
restraint on it. But it's important also to recognize that the Premier of this province and the Minister of Universities are both on record as saying there will not be a differential fee for international students in this province.
That surprises me. I didn't know that before. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I have a question for Dr. Pedersen this morning.
Yes.
Considering the great budgetary cuts that we have this year, how can you rationalize the phenomenal sum of money that he has asked to renovate the President's residence at the University of British Columbia? And has the public been made well aware of the literally millions of dollars that have been asked for that?
Well, I first of all take exception to the millions of dollars, but it's true, it's close to $500,000 that has been spent on the house that we live in. I am not going to try and make a comparison between those expenditures and the ongoing recurring kinds of budgetary needs that we have as far as the university is concerned. The Board of Governors at the University of British Columbia was of the view that it was important that the President move on to the campus and assume a role of some consequence as far as the interaction not only within the university but with the broader community. They made a decision to make that expenditure. I was not party to that. I don't accept responsibility for it necessarily. But I do accept the point of view that it's important that the President play a role along the lines that I just described.
And as a matter of fact, I think there's 200,000 university money and $250,000 philanthropic funds. Am I correct?
The actual expenditure of the university is $100,000 on the residence we are in. It was necessary to spend some money on relocating those who were in it, but that would have been spent anyway.
Go ahead from Victoria, please.
Yes, well, let's get back to what you said about first tenure.
Carry on.
Why, I think after a person has spent a little bit of time, he gets tenure, and then he gets bloody lazy. It's proven in any union thing where they say, hey, now you belong to a union, you cannot be fired. The productivity goes way down. And this has happened time and again, and it will always happen. If your job, you know you can't lose your job, what's the difference?
Gentlemen.
Well, I guess I'd like to have some indication of what you have in the way of data to back up your position that says that university professors are not productive. That is not my experience. The majority of them are highly productive, and they spend a lot of time at the work they get paid to do.
I'm not saying the majority aren't. I am saying that those ones who have tenure, in a lot of cases, in some cases, do not do their job, and nobody can fire them.
He's talking about tenure at large. Job security anywhere creates lazy people, he says.
Yeah, but listen, in most university policies and procedures related to tenure, you can dismiss tenured faculty for what is often, the words are often, failure to maintain a reasonable level of competence in your field. Now, it may very well be true in the North American university community that universities have not moved in that area as effectively for that tiny minority of people who perhaps, as in any other area of life, abuse or are not as productive as they can. But it's there in the policies and procedures.
In other words, we all rolled with inflation happily, and now that the moment of truth has come, we've got to pull up our socks.
Yes, I would suggest to the caller that if you're generalizing and suggesting that giving lifelong contract is generally non-productive, that one could have a good look at the Japanese society where there is lifelong commitment, and surely one would not want to argue that that's a non-productive area of the world.
Thank you. Just one final word on tenure. To attract a top professor, you give him tenure from the moment he arrives. Is that correct?
That is true. It varies. It depends on the degree to which you feel confident that the individual will continue to be highly productive. And in many cases, you can't attract that individual unless you offer.
But that's only, George, that's only true of senior people. The majority of people come into the university at a junior level. They're there for 4, 5, 6 years being tested and tried before tenure is considered.
Well, gentlemen, the public will rely on considerable outspoken leadership from you two gentlemen if at any time you detect a threat to freedom of speech following upon any legislative action by the government. I'm sure we can count on you.
Can indeed, and I know that you can count on my colleague on the left, and let me say how delighted I am to be on a show with him for the first time.
Only here a week. He arrives Tuesday, sees Premier Bennett yesterday.
He's
Webster a couple of days later.
Local British Columbians who told me when I said I was going to meet the Premier one day and you the next, said, don't worry about the Premier, but beware of Webster.
You're too kind to say well. Next, Joy Leach, President of the BC STA. My thanks to Messrs. Pedersen and Saywell, both of whom are tenured. I'll be back after the break. Each of whom is tenured. Joy Leach from Nanaimo is the president of the BC School Trustees Association. And Joy, I just want to say to you, how do you feel about Bill 6? How do you feel about the new massive centralization, if I'm correct? What do you see as the future of public education in British Columbia as of this moment?
Well, speaking for a very strong majority of school trustees, we're extremely alarmed at the removal or the attack on local control of education through Bill 6. We think that it denies the local community an opportunity to provide excellent education within its means. And we are, as an association, resisting that piece of legislation vigorously.
With all the power at your command, what is the worst aspect? The total centralized budgetary control in Victoria? Am I correct in that statement?
You're correct in the statement. The Act actually says that the minister can set limits, of course, and can control our budgets or any part of our budgets. The minister to date says that he doesn't want to use that control excepting for administrative costs and special education. However, he wants to retain the opportunity through legislation to come into the budgets at any time.
Oh, to try a long bow. If a minister didn't like, say, what a particular school district had done and he wanted a bus sent on to some outlying community, could he step in and say, supply a bus?
Yes. That's the real problem. And the minister has already indicated that while he only wants to control administrative costs and special education at this point, if a school district, and the school district he used was Prince George, decided to change the transportation system and he felt that the community of Prince George didn't agree, then he would come in and instruct the board on how to act.
Next, the pupil-teacher ratio. The average member of the public, when they see the pupil-teacher ratio moving back from what we're told is 19 to 17, they think, so what?
Yes.
How bad is that from your point of view?
Well, I think the public doesn't understand what pupil-teacher ratio means, first of all. And the pupil-teacher ratio now is about 17 to 1. That does not mean 17 children to 1 teacher. What that means is 17 students against all of the people in our school districts that have teaching degrees. So consequently, when you break it into class size, which is what everyone understands, how many students will be in front of 1 teacher, if you go to 19 to 1, in many districts it pushes the class size up in the area of 40 students. The minister has said that he wouldn't like to see the class sizes go above 40. Now, one only needs to imagine a class of 30 to 40 6- and 7-year-olds with 1 teacher to know that that would cause a horrendous problem. We can't go back to 1976. 1976 doesn't exist anymore.
No, but the cost between 76 and 83, and with the total number of children down in the school system, makes the public think, my God, they really are feather-bedded, these school boards, don't they?
That's what the public has been told. I think that if you go to the local level, most people understand the problem. In 1976, we had larger class sizes. We didn't have the problems of special education that we have today. We had different kinds of children who understood different kinds of authority. And it's simply not possible to go back to that world. The government itself has contributed to the problem of not being able to go back, and that is that they have sent the children, and I think that they were correct in doing this. They sent the children who previously had to go to centralized institutions for special education back home. But what they haven't done is compensated the school districts to provide that additional service to the level that is appropriate.
So therefore they're cutting back in special education. I thought they'd promised not to cut back in special education.
What they have done is they have stopped giving provincial service to children with special needs, and they have sent them back to the communities. Now, what they have not done is given us the amount of money or the kind of money they were using provincially for that service.
In other words,
so they're taking it out of the whole education pot at the local level.
Worth explaining a little more, I think. I remember the big kerfuffle when they closed Jericho Hill School. So they've saved all their expenses and institutional expenses in Jericho Hill.
And sent the children to us.
And have not compensated you properly for that.
That's right. Our special education budgets, the total school budget now provides for 16% of the budget to be directed to those special needs children. It's appropriate that their needs be met, but we can't be taking it out of the regular classroom.
Under the present potential Bill 3, does the government have the power to fire without approval of the school boards? Fire?
Does the government have?
Yeah.
The government has given, under Bill 3, the school boards the authority to fire at will.
Except for senior management. My reading of Bill 3 is that because of their concern, and more than they were concerned, of feather-bedded, highly paid administration, that they could fire directly if you didn't do what you were told. Is that correct?
They can do anything they want to do. That's true. They have the authority to do that. But I think essentially what's going to happen is that they're going to wring the administrators out of the system by reducing the amount of money available to them.
They've already wrung the principals and the vice principals out of the Teachers' Federation, have they
Indeed
not?
they have. Yes, they have.
In effect,
Which alarms us very much.
Why should that alarm you? Why should they ever have been in the BCTF?
Well, I think that we feel that they have tempered the BCTF and that all educators do have a lot of common ground and can represent their interests as a group. So that we feel that taking the principals and vice principals out of the BCTF simply creates a hierarchy that doesn't have to exist in education.
Have any of your colleagues or yourself received requests from the provincial government to submit lists of your administrators and your highest paid administrative staff so that they can be cut, the wages can be cut under Bill 3?
The provincial government has all that information.
They haven't asked you to present the list?
We present it every year. They have all that information, but no, they haven't asked us to specifically put lists in at this point because they're in there. They have all that information.
And is it not correct that under Bill 3, they will establish new salary levels downwards?
Yes, and essentially what they're trying to do is limit the top so that it will trickle down to limit the bottom.
Yeah, because the city of Vancouver, I happen to know, had to submit their top 30 paid salaries for consideration by this committee of deputy ministers.
Yes, but, and as I'm telling you, that they've always had that information from school boards.
You will have no control, therefore, in the future over the salary levels of your administrators.
We will have no control over that, and we will have no control over our secretary-treasurers, and it is true that our superintendents will not be our employees, because we will not hire and fire in the term, and we certainly won't set salary.
What is the effect of the section that provides a $2,000 fine to school board members who defy the wishes of the government?
It offends us. It's as simple as that. We're elected by our communities to act in the interests of the community and in the children of British Columbia. To suggest that a central government is going to tell us that we're going to be disciplined is simply offensive.
But it means that you cannot vote against their guidelines or you can be fined $2,000.
Without the fine. I think that school trustees will act on their positions of principle.
A couple of other points I want to make with you. Larry Kuehn is going to join us now. Leach at the BCSTA and Webster. Larry Kuehn, after the break. Larry Kuehn of the BC Teachers Federation has joined us, but first I want to put something quite simply to Joy Leach of the School Trustees Association. You know Bill 11, I know Bill 11, the wage freeze. Ed Peck, the power to revoke, do whatever the hell he likes. Are you going to go through this Gandhi dance with 75 school board arbitrations this year when there is no sense to it?
Jack, as you know, the Minister of Education has challenged school trustees at our August conference to bargain very vigorously, but be fair. Our problem as employers is that we have been given budget ceilings. We have lost the right to go to our community to tax, so we have no revenue possibilities beyond provincial government. When we sit down with our teachers, we are simply going to have to tell them that we have no ability to pay because we know our budgets for 3 years. There's no increase allowed in the budgets for teachers for 3 years. We cannot pluck the money out of the sky. We perhaps don't even have the will to pay, but we simply don't need to discuss that. When we sit down to a bargaining table with teachers, we have a given period of time to reach agreement. If we cannot reach agreement with the party opposite within that period of time, by law, the disagreement is referred to binding arbitration. It is taken out of the hands of school boards, and that has been the case for years. And in our opinion, that is what has driven the cost of education up. We have not been able to control the price, even if we had the will to control. Now, last year, we spent $1.5 million on arbitration cases, which were a farce, because the arbitration awards, of course, were made by arbitrators, lawyers, actually, and they had no regard for the compensation. They simply looked at the whole world and said, this is fair. We received awards that were well beyond our ability to pay because we simply didn't have the money. Those 1.5 million very costly arbitration cases were referred to Mr. Peck, and he took his jolly good time to advise us, sometimes up to 7 months later, what he thought we ought to be paying. Or if he didn't do that, he said, go back, sit down together as local level parties, and come up with another agreement because we don't like this one. Now, at the same time, while we had restraint, the government, and I don't know whether it had a lot to do with the election, but $70 million suddenly appeared on the table. Now, that was $70 million that we didn't have before, so suddenly we had the ability to pay. So then we had teacher awards, which we had no will to pay, at 3%. This year, that $70 million has been cut again, so that we consequently haven't got the ability to pay again.
Let me recap.
So that the teachers will have to pay.
As of now, you have no power of taxation.
None.
To improve or whatever your local education system.
That's right.
Your budgets are...
If Bill 6 goes through, yes.
Your budget has been set.
Yes.
And virtually frozen.
Yes.
Virtually frozen.
Yes.
You must, by law, go through the 75 arbitrations.
We must, by law, bargain.
Bargain.
And if we cannot reach agreement, we must, by law, refer the disagreement to arbitration.
And then when it's all over, whatever it is...
And pay lawyers.
And pay lawyers. Peck comes along and says, yay, nay, no.
We must, by law, refer the arbitration award to Mr. Peck,
who
will change the decision.
One question on the finance formula before I go to Larry. Is there any incentive in the new formula by which you can be rewarded for productivity or innovation?
The finance formula provides disincentive, not incentive.
Is it based on a proportion of your salary levels and the space used?
Yes.
Explain that to me.
All right. The money is generated by average teacher salary and average space requirements. One only needs to understand that to get a high average teacher salary, you will attract more dollars. When you have a school board and administrators trying to attract as many provincial tax dollars to a community as possible, you realize what will happen. The higher the average teacher salary, the more money you're going to get. The more schools you have open and operating, the more money you're going to get.
You mean it's a disincentive to close schools?
It's a disincentive to close schools.
Because you're finding...
And it's a disincentive to keep the lower paid teachers on salary.
Why do you stand it? What are you going to do about it? What is the BC School Trustees going to do about it?
The BC School Trustees Association intends to sit down with government in the most cooperative mode possible and explain what the local level problems are and the fact that our options are limited and therefore we cannot find creative solutions. I would point out, however, that there is no record of school trustees resisting the restraint goals. We've been in restraint for the past 2 years. We're going into our third very severe wave of restraint. We have each time, working with our employees, cooperatively with our teachers and our non-teaching staff, achieved government-set goals of restraint. We have not failed there.
But now you've been totally emasculated, have you not?
Yes, and there seems to be another reason for that.
What is it?
I can only speculate on that, but it would appear that there is a lack of trust in local level. And local level does not mean school trustees. Local level means the people who elect us. There is a lack of trust that the community wants to support the
I'll
province.
come back to Larry in a minute, but I must get this on the record right now. Have you got representative in college boards as school trustees?
Not any longer.
Why not?
Because the government has removed the trustee representatives from the college boards and have left only government appointees, which is, we feel, a very unfortunate situation for communities, since there is now no elected voice sitting on that decision.
They've just arbitrarily taken the school trustees who are elected from the local college boards and left it entirely to government appointments.
Yes, precisely. And again, it's the removal of the local level.
Just for Larry's benefit, how many teachers are going to be fired this year?
3,000.
Larry Kuehn? 3,000?
3,000, certainly the projection over the next 2 years, I think, is 3,000. The change in pupil-teacher ratio from 17 to 1 to 19 to 1, with the caveats that were already indicated, mean that there are 3,000 more on top of the 1,000 positions that are already gone from the system.
Do you agree, as most people seem to these days, with the aims and objects, if not the methods, of this particular package of bills?
Well, I think that if we just look at education, there are two key elements that simply can't be agreed with by me or by most people if they really understand them. One of them Joy has just mentioned, and that is taking away the authority from people at the local level to make decisions. And it's not just in education, it's in a whole lot of other areas, that power is being centralized in a very few hands in Victoria, and local communities and local people are not going to have the power to make decisions about education and a whole lot of other things about their lives. The second thing that we can't agree with is that the right to an education, the right to an appropriate education, is very severely threatened by the changes that the government is making in this province, whether they be the cutbacks at the public school level or at the post-secondary level that we've already heard about. And I don't think that's a principle that we can agree with.
More with Larry Kuehn of the BCTF and Joy Leach of the BCSTA, and your calls too after the break. I want to go to Larry Kuehn first and say, you, of course, are all set and ready and prepared to go through the 75 arbitration boards where you don't come to an agreement with your school board. Is that correct?
What the government has done is to set up a system that is going to be frustrating for everyone and expensive for everyone, because nobody can come out a winner in it. It's, as has already been indicated, that there are several hoops that we have to jump through, that we're required to jump through by law, because the School Act still is in effect, and yet nobody in any of those, at any of those steps has the real authority to make a decision, because ultimately all the decisions are being made arbitrarily by the government, who aren't even at the table, are not direct parties in any of it. So it's, we have to go through arbitration. We have no options unless we want to agree to take major pay cuts every year for the next 3 years.
If there were to be no arbitrations, it would be no increase at all, or would it be a cutback?
I would expect that there would have to be a decrease.
Minus 2% is the figure I hear mentioned. What will you do if you get minus 2% from PEC?
Well,
are you not prepared to take less to employ more teachers?
Well, that isn't the option. The government has said even if we take less, that there is going to be an increase in the pupil-teacher ratio. We can't even buy our jobs at this stage because they have set an objective and they've told the boards they are to eliminate certain numbers of people from the system over that 3-year period.
True?
True. The irony of all of this is that last year we were unable to lay off teachers, to make planned
Didn't
reductions.
somebody say that the government would ensure that no teachers would be laid off last year?
Indeed, last year.
That was a 6-day...
And what's, well, of course, but what the school boards were trying to do was develop an overall plan to shrink the system to meet what our resources would apparently be. But we were not able to do that. The minister of the day would not give permission to school boards to lay off teachers. So we could not take action.
Now, I want to get to Bill 3. We can go through all the old educational arguments that bigger class teacher ratio will lead to crowded classrooms and children will quit, right?
Yes.
But let's go to Bill 3. When you, as your people are fired, as they will be under Bill 3, do you have in your present contract any compensation packages for firing?
No. Because of the nature of the legislation that we have bargained under for years, our contracts tend to, with a few exceptions that have been negotiated outside of the specific provisions of the law, deal with salaries and bonuses. And there hasn't been the negotiation of the kinds of things that exist in many other contracts on seniority, on compensation for being laid off, for any of those kinds of things.
Do you have recall procedures under your present agreement?
There are no recall provisions. There are no layoff provisions by seniority. None of those things exist.
None of them, they've been in fact, but not existing. Is that correct?
No, they've never existed. And in fact, there's no such thing as teacher layoff. There's only such a thing as teacher firing or dismissal. As Larry said, the School Act has given us the criteria for taking that action. We had, under existing law, not the new legislation, but existing law, we can only dismiss teachers if we close classrooms, close programs, or what is
schools.
Or schools.
And what's the change in this one? That you can fire individual teachers at any time, any place?
Yes.
For all of the reasons that are outlined in the bill, which is basically anything that the board wants to say.
It's money.
Well, it can be on the basis of budgets, or that they don't have enough money. It can be on the basis that there's a reorganization. All they have to do is make one change in the organization of a school, and they can justify firing anybody they want under those kinds of provisions.
Well, under the policies of this government, you don't expect anything else. Is it not therefore essential that teachers' heads must be chopped to keep the schools going?
Teachers' heads must be chopped.
Teachers' jobs must be chopped.
The government has simply told the boards that they will have to fire teachers. They will have to get rid of teachers from the system. And many of the boards have already prepared the way for that, for in fact getting rid of people in December. We have had several hundred teachers in this province who are on temporary contracts. Some of them have been in the system for several years on a temporary contract every year. But this year, instead of it being a contract for the period of September through June, many people have been hired on September to December contracts, so that boards are in a position in January to start to follow the government's directives to get rid of those people from the system and to bring a whole level of disruption that we've never seen in the system before.
We're not doing that because the government is telling us to fire teachers. What we're doing is planning to be able to deliver an education system within the resources that are made available to us under restraint. And we accept that there needs to be restraint. Now, what we've done is we've established priorities. We're trying as much as possible at the local level to plan. And so that when we do have to impose restraint at this extreme level, we at least have a plan to do that with some order. It would be irresponsible for us to suggest to teachers coming on stream and who have come on stream in the past 2 years that they have jobs to look forward to in the next couple of years, because it is unlikely that we can pay for those services. So we have not led them to believe that they have security.
Well, I don't think any teacher in the system right now believes that there's any security for anyone. Bill 3 has made it clear that we are operating in a system where nobody can do any real planning at the classroom level, and planning is essential if we're going to have quality education.
Don't you think the public supports, however, one part in Bill 3 which removes principals and vice principals from the BC teachers, from the bargaining unit?
Actually, it doesn't remove them from the BCTF. They are, in fact, caught in an absolutely untenable position where they still are members of the BCTF, but the BCTF cannot negotiate for them.
Their salaries come under this direct committee review. There's
That's
no
right.
doubt about that.
They, in fact, are having absolutely all of their bargaining rights taken away. They have no say in the process of setting their salaries. They have nobody to sit down at the table with. The cabinet will sit down and just determine arbitrarily what their salaries are.
Was it not necessary, that this move, though, to trim the administration numbers? Because when you cut at the bottom, you got to cut at the top.
I don't think that we would quarrel at all with the suggestion that we ought to be cutting our costs, and our administrative costs in some districts may have gotten out of hand. I do believe that the method that is being used is not useful and is not going to encourage quality education.
Now, of course, you're always in this kind of half world of not being a union and not being this and not being that. True or false?
Yes.
That's true, isn't it?
Yes, we don't have all the rights of unions or operate in the way unions do in all ways, nor do we have the rights of professions and operate in that way. We are a mix of those two.
And therefore, you will, if necessary, take job action to support solidarity.
Well, those are questions that teachers are going to have to face when the point comes, if it comes.
Because you don't have the right to strike, do you?
Well, there is nothing in the law which prohibits us from striking. Strike is not, there is nothing in the School Act that says anything about strike, either that we have or don't have the right.
Yeah,
and our advice is that when that's the case, that the common law applies, and before legislation applied to everybody, there was a right to strike under certain circumstances in the common law. So that does exist.
But there is no protection under the Labor Code for that action.
That's right. There's the law is silent in terms of
and
teachers.
you
would hope that teachers would not have to resort to such action.
Calls to Messrs. Leach and to each side of the fence. Joy Leach of the BCSTA, Larry Kuehn of the teachers, after the break. You know, it's quite funny. We're sitting here talking about all this stuff. Legislation might not be through till February next year. What does that do?
And if that happens, it means that we will have double the teachers that will have to go.
Say that again.
It's true.
That any
if we
delay...
can take action right now, and I'll give you Nanaimo School Board, if we can take action right now, and I'm not suggesting that for sure it's going to be all in teachers, but we must decrease our salary account by at least 65 people. And depending on what range of salary. If we can't take action now, we're going to run out of money to the point where we will have to take 110.
To complete your year?
Yeah, if we can't take action in January, we will have to, when we get to the summer, to be able to go on to the next 4 months, we will have to take double.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm wondering if she can say that I have two children going to school in Delta, and they have a problem with the teachers out there. If one of the teachers are going to be laid off in December on a contract basis and they're going through 3 or 4 teachers, how are the children supposed to get used to each teacher's format if there's just not going to be anybody there to do anything?
Valid question.
It's one of the problems that local boards are struggling with, and I'm sure that what they'll attempt to do as much as possible is to keep some sort of continuity. But it is most certainly one of the problems that we've got.
It's going to be incredibly disruptive. For example, if you take one elementary teacher out of a staff of 11, you're going to have to reorganize every single class in that school for halfway through the year in order to allocate those students around to the other
Go ahead,
classes.
please.
Mr. Webster?
Yes, sir.
This is a nebulous debate in that Joy Leach says the board's options are limited. The board options are not limited. They are very specific, and they are made unambiguously clear. The boards will have the right to set priorities within the established dollars over a 3-year period. In other words, you plan your work, then work your plan. You'll utilize everyone with a teaching degree within the system, whether it's a caretaker, a vice superintendent, or a superintendent, or a camp counselor. Your challenge is to utilize these people within the dollars that you have. Now that's what the message the government is giving to the school boards. For instance, in North Vancouver, they have 4 vice superintendents that were super principals within the system. They took them out of the system and placed them in administrative categories. That's not the way you operate a
education system. I'll hang up and listen.
It's obviously a trustee, perhaps in North Vancouver, but he put that succinctly.
I don't disagree with him that we have options within the control. Our problem is that to exercise options beyond cutting teachers, for example, options beyond taking direction as to which administrator will be able to do what, then we absolutely are not limited, are not free. So consequently, it is true that there are options within the structure that the province has given us.
But there's one level of...
There's a bottom line, and the bottom line is...
And the most important option is not available to school boards, and that is to define what the needs of the children are in that community and to provide programs that will meet those needs.
It's a question of dollars and delivering a standard level of education throughout the province. Is that not so?
No. What the government is doing...
Is that not so?
What they're trying to do is equalize. But what they're making a mistake about is that there is a suggestion that one shoe can be designed to fit all the feet in British Columbia, and that is not possible.
Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good morning, Jack.
Morning, ma'am.
I'd like to talk to your two guests. I'd like to ask them a few questions.
Go ahead.
I'm the mother of two children. One child went to Yorko School.
Ma'am, I don't want to get into individual education. Ask me a question on the prop.
Child went to, that time the NDP was in power, went to Waverley School.
No, ma'am, I'm not going into a comparison back in '72. You're not on the topic. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I'd like to make a few points, and I'll hang up and listen. First of all, they're always worried about the number of students in a class, but I can't understand how it is that from the Asian countries of China and Japan and so forth, where they have 50 and 60 in a class, they come in here and they're in the top of the class all the time, and there's only one teacher.
Okay, hold on. Now, he's not on the topic of restraint as such or the problems you face, but it gives us a chance. One, these children come from a better disciplined society, don't they?
Which children?
Children from other countries.
Certainly if they make it to school.
If they make it to school. They seem to have a greater incentive to work hard. That's because of our society, though. It's not their fault.
No, I think that there are more people. There are a few people getting into the classroom. What we've had is an open society with educational opportunity made available to all children.
No, I'm not taking his point as such. I wanted really to get into the second language problems you face.
Yes, well, in Vancouver, about half of the students in the school system have English as a second language, which presents some very real difficulties in terms of certainly of large classes of doing an adequate job for them. And one of the things that is threatened, at least to some degree, is the English as a second language support. You simply, when you have that many students who don't speak English as their first language, you have to have support services for them.
They're going to be cut too, aren't they? Everything's going to be cut.
Everything is going to be cut, and I think that we must make the statement at this point that if we cannot afford, as British Columbians, to pay, then obviously we're going to refine, not redefine, but refine our system. And I don't think that school trustees are backing away from that responsibility. If we can't afford a Cadillac, we will not have a Cadillac. But what we want to be able to do is have an ability to respond to the needs of the students, which are needs that are going to be for the next century.
Would you recommend, first to you, Larry, and then to you, Jai, would you recommend that a youngster going through high school brightly nowadays go into teacher training?
Yes.
Well, you would?
Yes, indeed. I think we're going to need more teachers, and I think this is very short term. I think it's a very cyclical kind of thing. I think the future of British Columbia is strong, and the need for education is constant.
And you?
Well, certainly I think that anybody considering going into teacher training right now has to recognize that there are 6,000 to 8,000 people in this province trained as teachers who don't have teaching jobs and would like to be teaching. So in the short term, the prospects are very
And
great.
3,000 more to go within the foreseeable future, correct?
But it's temporary, in my opinion.
My thanks to Joy Leach, President of the BC School Trustees Association, as we continued our series, and to Larry Kuehn of the BC Teachers Federation. And I'll be back with a little walkabout, a change of pace for the first time this week after the break.
You now see a reporter eavesdropping, but I've got permission to eavesdrop because the people behind me are part of an immense federal government Royal Commission. And I think it's a totally impossible dream. And now, quite rudely, no, not rudely, you know me, I'm going to interrupt the commission. May I interrupt Mr. Donald MacDonald?
Sir, how are you?
Are you having just a little caucus meeting after
Just a little caucus meeting here to discuss some of the day's events?
Well, I was going to suggest to you that I didn't want to interrupt your impossible dream. Not that I'm cynical at all, but with the state of affairs in British Columbia and in the nation, when will your commission give us a final report on Canada's future, if you please?
Well, I would think early in 1985 we'll have the document, which we hope will be of major significance.
Is there any aspect of the nation's economy or unity or constitution or technological future or employment that you are not required to cover?
Well, it certainly is very comprehensive. I think we're going to find that there are some elements of it which require greater depth and analysis, and we're not going to be able to deal with, but we're going to try to provide at least a good general perspective out for...
Let me get the date right. Your final report will come out in 85?
Early 85. Mm-hmm.
But didn't you say that after one show around the country, you're going to concentrate your objectives?
Yes. What we're going to do, Jack, is we're bringing out a report in the early 84 saying, after our deliberations, these are the challenges that we have, and these are some of the choices that the country faces in meeting those challenges. And so that will put, really to focus the issue, we're going to then be having...
It's going to be specific?
Certainly in terms of focus, but it's going to put a number of options out there, and people are going to have to choose. Then we're going to have a discussion in which further discussion in which people get the opportunity to say, that's crazy, I'll go for that, you're not going to do that.
Would you be good enough to introduce me to some of the members of your commission, some of whom even I do not know?
Okay, well, Mrs. Jean Wadds, who has recently been the High Commissioner of Canada in London.
Oh, you were the woman who took all the heat and burden of the day in the big constitutional crisis,
Yes,
right?
I was the one who had all the fun there, yes.
Trudeau was in power, but you were the Tory High Commissioner, High Commissioner appointed by the Tories in London.
I'm still a Tory, yes.
Why after that, you know, and that was a tough experience, would you take on a limitless job like this looking at the total Canadian economy?
Because I just like the pace.
You like it?
Yes, yes.
Is it a field of expertise? I know that you were very strong in broadcasting, in which you're going to concentrate as a commissioner.
I'm strong in broadcasting?
Well, you used to have a lot to do with broadcasting.
Well, I was on the committee years ago, but I was also on the agricultural committee and many others, you know, too.
And maybe you're strong in farming. What is your
Yes, I am.
specific interest as a commissioner?
Well, I think small business and farming and the forestry we heard this morning is fascinating to me.
Tell me, can a commission like this be in effect non-partisan, non-political?
Absolutely, absolutely. Just look at us all. We're as divided ideologically as you can get in any group. And we're getting
Donald
along just
MacDonald
fine.
is a liberal and who knows might still have a political future.
That's right.
I think I know the next gentleman, if I may cut across you.
Jack,
Bill Hamilton.
If you don't know me by now, you never will.
Bill, I don't know whether you've let us down or not. You know, here we are in the middle of this incredible, what should we call it, storm in British Columbia. And you have stepped aside.
Well, of course, I was just about due for retirement, and when they asked me to serve in this committee, I think it's one of the most exciting things that I've ever been asked to do in a lifetime, because we're dealing with the whole future of Canada, the economic future, the relations between governments, and if we get it right, and if we get the kind of advice and guidance that we want from the people out there and that we're open to, we would not have the same kind of mess in Canada that we seem to have encountered in the last 2 or 3 years. And that's not a political statement, it's just an economic statement.
But Royal Commissions, don't you tend to become the target merely for a number of activists as well as academicians?
Activists, yes, but when you look at the people from British Columbia, the Council of Forest Industries, the social groups, the cultural groups, we've heard now, even in 2 days, something like 14 different groups of people and individuals, and they've all been able to give us they're not all in agreement, but we've learned something from every one of them.
Now, the commissioner on your left, another gentleman I don't know.
Michel Robert of Vienna.
How do you do? I'm very pleased to meet you.
Michel Robert, are you from Montreal or Quebec City?
Montreal, from Montreal.
Does your name strike a chord with me on the Keeble Commission?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, I was active on the Keeble Commission and the first MacDonald Commission.
The other MacDonald Commission.
That's correct, yes, but I was the lawyer then, appearing on one side. In other words, I was not sitting as a commissioner.
You won't mind, although we've just met, if I make a little crack?
No.
I hope the recommendations of this Commission become and stay more visible than those of the other MacDonald Commission?
The main recommendation of the first MacDonald Commission has been followed by the government, or is being implemented now, which is the creation of a civilian agency in security.
We shan't discuss that.
No, not at this time. No.
We'll deal with politicians in that one,
That's
shan't
right,
we?
yes.
Now, what about you? What do you see for the... Are you going as far as the year 2000 in your forecast for the Canadian economy?
Yes, we try. Well, maybe not forecast in the usual sense, but certainly it's a long-term study. In other words, we're not concentrating on immediate problems, but...
I was horrified to see, though, that you're going to deal with the broadest possible of unity and might even recommend changes in the Constitution.
Oh, yes, certainly. There are possibly changes in the Constitution that could be recommended, because there is a portion of the mandate which is institutional. In other words, we'll have to study possible reforms to the Senate, to the House of Commons, to the federal institutions, crown corporations, and maybe even the Supreme Court.
Oh, that brings me to my friend Jack Messer.
Nice to see you again, Jack.
Former minister in the Saskatchewan NDP government.
That's correct.
So you're a socialist.
Oh, some people say I am.
Well, a social democrat, that might make
That's a little more appropriate.
Yeah. You must be as cynical as most people, certainly at my age, are about royal commissions. You convince me that as part of this non-partisan commission, I shouldn't be cynical.
Well, I think that we have to keep mindful that we're going to be making recommendations. Not all of them are going to be accepted. Not all of them may be unanimous. I think that that's only realistic. But we should, as I wanted to start saying, we should be mindful that just the process itself is going to make Canadians aware of a lot of problems and a lot of opportunities that I don't think that they've individually turned their minds to. And this in itself will have some corrective measure in addressing some of the problems that we're confronted with today.
Do those terms of reference make it quite clear that it all must be done within the framework of a mixed free enterprise government economy, right?
Well, I think that we have lots of latitude. It's up to the politicians to interpret whether or not we were really able to make the recommendations to the letter of the intent when it was conveyed to us.
By the way, you're not a lawyer, are you?
No, well, I wouldn't want to be a lawyer. You know that.
There's one standing behind you. If I may finish with a simple question to Donald MacDonald. Will you be tackling and making recommendations on some of the specific problems in the country just now, for instance, as to the operation, or the concept and operation of Petro-Canada and CDIC, and the present kind of broad policies of the government?
Not necessarily specifically, for example, on Petro-Canada, but certainly a look at the concept as to whether, for example, a crown corporation is the best way to achieve industrial or economic development, or whether they should be using other methods.
In other words, no holdback and new ideas.
No holdback, and indeed, we welcome new ideas. I think that we're very much looking for fresh thinking on all of these questions.
May I thank you for allowing me to interrupt your little tete-a-tete, as we say in Scotland, Michel. Monday morning, BC's new Attorney General, Brian Smith, is going to explain or defend the attack on legal aid and some of the other very strange and arbitrary actions of the legislation brought in by the government, of which he is a senior legal advisor. And as change of pace too, Monday, we're going to have Inger Hansen, who is the Commissioner, oh, I hope I've got this right, on the Freedom of Information Act. At least she's an expert from Ottawa on the Freedom of Information Act. And Webster will be back for his second week, Monday, 9 a.m. precisely.